Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a look at a really fascinating piece of sports history that honestly goes way, way beyond what happens on the pitch. We're talking about the sheer, undeniable power of institutional design. When we think of legendary sports managers, we usually picture these charismatic, fiery motivators or these brilliant tactical visionaries. But sometimes, history is shaped not by charm, but by cold, unapologetic structural precision. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and completely break down the architectural blueprint of Bill Struth's sporting empire at Rangers. To really wrap our heads around who Struth was, it kind of helps to compare him to another absolute giant of the game. If you know your Scottish football, you definitely know Jock Stein, the architect of Celtic's romantic, attacking soul. But sitting squarely on the other side of that historic divide is Bill Struth. And Struth? Well, he was absolutely not a romantic. He was a relentless industrialist who basically forged Rangers into a machine of pure clockwork efficiency. This wasn't a man of warmth or flashy flair. He was a man of cold, precise structure. Keeping this contrast in mind gives us a really clear mental model for the Rangers' way, this stubborn, profoundly successful commitment to tradition and ironclad discipline. So here is our literal blueprint for deconstructing this 1920s machine today. First, we'll look at the Iron Architect himself. Second, the disciplinarian's blueprint. Third, the empire of consistency. Fourth, how it became a double-edged sword. And finally, we'll wrap up with the modern legacy. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The Iron Architect. Let's look at exactly who Struth was when he first walked through the doors. The year is 1920. When Bill Struth takes the reins at Ibrox, the entire world is still completely reeling from the devastating chaos of the Great War. He inherits a club that, sure, already has some prestige, but what he does next is nothing short of extraordinary. He didn't just manage a football team. He engineered a perfectly ordered state out of a world that was entirely fractured. He stepped into the post-war chaos and transformed Rangers into an absolute juggernaut. And to really understand the massive scale of his architectural prowess, just consider this number: 34 years. He remained at the helm for nearly 4 decades. I mean, in modern sports, surviving just 3 or 4 years is a huge achievement. Struth's 34-year tenure is a living testament to the impenetrable system he built. And this brilliantly illustrates his unrelentless success. 18 league titles. Think about that for a second. He didn't just build a squad that was good for a few seasons. He managed to keep the club at the absolute pinnacle of the sport for an entire generation. Add to that his 10 Scottish Cups. This staggering trophy haul completely proves exactly why the sheer force of his will demands our attention today. This wasn't luck. No way. It was a manufactured systemic dominance. Moving on to Section 2, the disciplinarian's blueprint. Let's examine the rigid methodologies that actually built this success. Struth fundamentally believed that football wasn't just about skill, it was a game of stamina and character. So he built his empire on what became known as the Ibrox Standard. Now, this wasn't just a basic code of conduct, it was the cultural bedrock of the entire institution. Struth was a fiercely rigid disciplinarian obsessed with the absolute minutiae of professional behavior. He demanded a level of decorum that would honestly seem completely alien to us in the modern era. He was turning the club into a highly respected, wider institution. Let's break down the 3 core pillars of his blueprint. Number 1, the suit. Struth literally mandated that players wear a shirt, tie, and suit whenever representing the club in public. Why? Because he believed if you couldn't present yourself with dignity off the pitch, you definitely lacked the mental fortitude to be disciplined on it. Number 2, the science of fitness. Long before modern sports science was even a thing, he obsessed over physical conditioning, engineering his squads to be fitter and faster than anyone else. And number 3, tactical conservatism. Instead of, fluid attacking experiments, Struth prioritized shape, discipline, and the percentage play. For him, winning was always paramount over spectacle. His teams were designed to make the fewest mistakes possible and just wait for the opponents to crack. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how that elite fitness translated directly into a ruthless tactical weapon. He created what fans started calling the Struth quarter hour, basically the final 10 minutes or so of a game. While the opposition's legs were turning to jelly, his team's gears only tightened. They didn't just outplay you, they outlasted you, completely crushing fading opponents through sheer relentless endurance. All right, Section 3, the empire of consistency. This is where we see how the club functioned as a perfectly ordered state. You see, Struth's greatest tactical achievement wasn't a clever new formation. It was a radical consistency. He built an infrastructure where losing was treated totally differently than at other clubs. Defeat wasn't just a disappointment, it was viewed as a systemic anomaly. If they lost, it meant a gear in the machine was fundamentally broken, and it required an immediate investigation to weed out anyone who couldn't handle the pressure. He created this incredibly intense environment where only the mentally toughest could survive, essentially pushing out anyone who played purely for the joy of the game rather than the absolute requirement of victory. So the crucial point is, he anchored the harsh reality of his impossible expectations with this one chilling story. Once, after a very rare defeat, a player tried to defend himself by telling Struth that they had done their best. Struth reportedly just looked at him and replied, "Your best was not enough." Wow. Just brutal, right? Which brings us to the twist of our explainer in Section 4, a double-edged sword. This relentless pursuit of perfection created a profound paradox for Rangers. On one hand, it was obviously their greatest strength. It produced a team that was almost impossible to beat, an unstoppable gatekeeper built entirely on tradition. But, on the other hand, it became their greatest structural weakness in the decades that followed his departure. By obsessing so much over the old ways, the club became fundamentally resistant to change. The very systems and rigid traditions that made them invincible back then eventually made them structurally rigid later on. Let's move into our final part. Section 5, the modern legacy. Bridging the gap to today. When we map Struth's 1920s methods onto how modern clubs operate in 2026, it is wild how ahead of his time he was. He fundamentally understood the black box of a sports club decades before that term even existed. His rigid discipline maps perfectly to today's data-driven behavioral codes. His standardized training and obsessive focus on infrastructure, those are the direct, undeniable ancestors of the modern academy model we see everywhere today. His legacy really boils down to 3 enduring principles. First, institution over ego. He established the brutal reality that no single player is ever greater than the club. Second, the long game. He wasn't just building a team for the next season, he was building an empire for the next half-century. And third, the power of expectation. He proved that when you set the bar at the absolute ceiling, people will actually learn to reach it. He turned the ridiculously high standards of the Ibrox Standard into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And honestly, this is exactly why this explainer matters today. Bill Struth is the ultimate case study in institutional design. He proved that if you impose order on chaos, and if you treat your pursuit with absolute life or death gravity, you build a system that values the collective over the individual, a system that survives long after the architect has left the building. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to ponder. Struth built a perfect, unbeatable machine, but one that was structurally resistant to the future. So as you look at the organizations, the sports teams, or even the businesses around you today, ask yourself, is perfect order worth the cost of rigidity? Can a modern institution actually survive by clinging to an iron legacy? Or will the very systems that make you great eventually be the ones that hold you back? Think on that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.